I came to Almeria to do the cutting of Once Upon a Time in the West, and I came with the big treatment of Dakyosake. Sergio intended to close his Western saga with Once Upon a Time in the West. He just wanted to produce Dakyosake. He had the nice intuition choosing Peter Bogdanovich. He saw the only movie that Bogdanovich, he said, this is a talented guy, but Bogdanovich wanted to do a Bogdanovich movie, not a Sergio Leone movie. That was the problem. Sergio wanted to have another Sergio Leone behind the camera, no? And he told the movie to Bogdanovich, and he said, zoom. Bogdanovich said, no, I hate zooms. I never use zooms. He tried many directors, and also Giancarlo Santi started to direct the movie for 1 or 2 days until Steiger came on the set. Sergio said to Steiger, Giancarlo is like me. I tell him all the shots and he does. And Steiger said, okay, tomorrow I send my cousin on the set and I tell him how to act. And then he called the manager and the manager said, Leone, come on, please. It was forced. But there's not much of Leone in the script. I was more free on the script because it wasn't his movie, I had a big fight with Sergio during this period, and I said, so I'm out. And then he called me back. And, we worked together for, 3 or 4 weeks, just sitting around the table and talking, telling the scenes, It was astonished because I never take notes, almost never. No, after a day work, it was 10 lines. Because if I'm convinced, I don't need to take notes. No, we talked about characters. We had Tuco character because I wrote the script for Eli Wallach. Obviously, it was a peon, simple, big sense of family and honor and so on, and meeting with a deluded revolutionary who was disillusioned about this thing. Sergio had inside the idea of the dynamite Irishman and the Mexican bandit put together. It was a story of 2 guys in a political context. They was interested in the meaning of such different characters. A man who has lost all his hopes in a better world, and the man who was forced to become a revolutionary. Unfortunately, Sergio took some biblical time, a movie every 10, 12 years. It was too much. He started to think bigger and bigger and bigger movie. His ideal was David Lean. And I said, Sergio, get back a little. Let's do a black and white thriller. But he was the kind of director who, at the moment of his career, had more fun talking about what he did than doing movies. It was a pity because in 20 years he made only 2 movies. It was a loss for cinematic culture.
From the very beginning, Dakyosake had a lot of different versions. It had a lot of different titles as well. The original U.S. release was called Dakyosake, but it didn't go over very well, so it was pulled almost immediately and released a few months later with the title Fistful of Dynamite. Fistful of Dynamite had always been intended to be the title for the UK release of the film, and they were already prepping that. So it was easy to get the film back with the new title and the posters very quickly. There were so many different versions. Say the US version, there were a couple of versions of that. There were a couple of versions of the Italian version. So to call something the original version, particularly for this film, even more than the others, was very difficult. And the film has really taken about 30 years to evolve to what is now considered its complete version. The fact that Dakyosake was made several years later, I think it was about 4 or 5 years after Good and the Bad and the Ugly, there was quite a bit of difference in the elements that we had to work with. I suppose they had a little more money, but also technology had probably been improved even in that short period of time, so that the sound was a lot cleaner and the picture negative was not bad at all. In fact, we didn't have much trouble with the picture. There were just so many different versions that we had to try to match them up. That was the main challenge on the picture. I would say that of the material that was cut from the English version, it wasn't necessarily so much violence. It actually was just more character development. As is somewhat typical in American films, we want to see more action and maybe less character. If you're only familiar with the shorter original English version, you will learn a lot more about the lead characters in seeing this version. They're more fully fleshed out, and you understand more of their motivation and why they feel and do the things that they do.
It is astonishing, Leone's career, because it's a very small body of work. It's basically 6 mature movies, all made between 1964 and 1971. It's extraordinary, very compressed, Finished Fistful, we go straight into A Few Dollars More, go straight into The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, go straight into Once Upon a Time in the West, and then a gap of a couple of years and straight into Duck You Sucker. It's incredibly compressed. And he revisits ideas from movie to movie, only this time he expands even more. He was deliberately having a different pace to this film, making it very, very slow and stretching time. He didn't like these fast-talking Hollywood movies where everyone was talking at once, partly because he couldn't understand a word they were saying, but he thought they moved too fast. He wanted to slow it down. Duck You Sucker feels like a very melancholy, dark film, as if it's made by a man in late middle age, like Visconti's Death in Venice, for example. And in fact, Leone at this time said he was looking at the obituary columns with great interest because his friends had started appearing. But in fact, it was made by a man who was born in 1929. He was only 42 years old when he made this film. But it is a dark, melancholy film, and his films would become more melancholy as they went on. And as his films developed, he became more and more sort of disillusioned with the mythology. All these Wild West myths were all a sham. What lay behind it was a lie. And Duck You Sucker is about the mythology of revolution, which was very, very strong in the post-1968 film world in Europe. A lot of political movies being made in the wake of the student riots in May 68 in Paris at the time. And Leone just wouldn't buy all that. He said, it's a myth. The myth of the Mexican Revolution in the movies as a clean, heroic sort of activity. It was dirty. It was much more complicated than that. An awful lot of people got shot. Italian politics was very, very unstable in the late 1960s, and terrorism appeared on the streets of Rome for the first time ever. And the trauma of bombs going off in Rome affected everyone and made them very uneasy about politics. And so Leone decided at the beginning of Duck You Sucker to take both the myth of the Mexican Revolution and the myth of left-wing politics post-1968 and epitomize them by a famous quote by Chairman Mao, with which the movie would begin. The revolution is not a gala dinner. The revolution is not a piece of embroidery. It's not a nice, gentle, good-natured thing. The revolution is an act of violence. And that's how the movie begins. And it was very sad that the Chairman Mao prologue was taken out of the international release prints, because I guess that was a very specific cultural context for it to be said in, and they thought audiences wouldn't understand it. In any case, who goes to a Western to hear the thoughts of Chairman Mao? It was an odd thing to do, but it was a deliberate gesture to say, I'm disillusioned with politics. Duck You Sucker was the film when Leone really began to grow up. I mean, that he's making a point about contemporary Italy, which he'd never done before. And he's making a point about his own background, because he grew up in a socialist background. His father was a socialist filmmaker in the 1910s and 20s and had fallen out with Mussolini's regime, as a result of which he didn't work hardly at all when Leone was growing up. He was in the out group politically. So he's rejecting his own background, he's rejecting Italian politics, he's rejecting 1968, and he's rejecting the myth of the Mexican Revolution. And that's a very mature thing to do. It was also mature because it's about the relationship between two male friends. He'd had relationships before, but people didn't develop. They just were. Lee Van Cleef was Lee Van Cleef. Clint Eastwood was Clint Eastwood. But now, Sean changes as a result of his contact with Juan, and Juan changes as a result of his contact with Sean. They become deeper human beings as a result of their interaction. So Leone grew up with Duck You Sucker, and some people didn't like that. They said, the grown-up Leone isn't nearly as much fun as the innocent, regressive, childlike Leone of the Dollars films. There's a kind of directness and openness and innocence in a funny way about the Dollars films, which isn't there. It's a very dark film, Duck You Sucker. And the violence has consequences. It's not fun anymore. The double crosses have consequences. The betrayals have consequences. It's not, a joke at Eli Wallach's expense anymore. People die. Families die. The part of Sean Mallory, the Irishman, was originally written for Jason Robards. The I.R.A. man was absolutely perfect for Jason Robards' persona. The flawed romantic, the romantic who's lost his illusions, who drinks too much. But that didn't appeal to the studio. Then they thought, well, a lot of these I.R.A. men were very young at the time. Actually, the I.R.A. didn't exist in 1930, and they were so young, they'd have been about 10 years old. But nevertheless, even when the I.R.A. started in 1919, they tended to be very youthful, hot-headed youths. So how about Malcolm McDowell, the guy from If, who would then go on to make A Clockwork Orange? But that didn't go down too well. So they settled on Coburn. I think the thinking was a radically different acting style. Cool, stylish, the Eastwood figure, but Eastwood with a real twinkle in his eye, a sort of send-up almost performance. And Coburn was a big actor then. I mean, he'd done very well in The Magnificent Seven, where he only had about sort of 12 lines in the entire movie, or maybe even 12 words. He was at his peak at this time. Oh, by the way, Eastwood was offered the part at one point. I read an American Film Institute seminar where there was a discussion, and it transpired that Clint Eastwood had been offered the part, and one of the members of the seminar said, "Did you see the movie? Did you like it?" And Clint Eastwood said, "I never got to see that one." The part of Juan Miranda, the Mexican bandit in Duck Husaca, was written for Eli Wallach by Sergio Donati, the scriptwriter. And Eli Wallach had this great hit as Tuco, and this was son of Tuco. He'd shout a lot, he'd throw himself, he'd swear a lot, he'd have these very elaborate curses, he'd chat with God, he'd cross himself, he'd do all the things Tuco did, only more so. But the studio, United Artists, wanted a bigger star. This was a big budget, and they wanted someone who was internationally better recognized. So they suggested Rod Steiger. And Steiger gives a great performance, actually. I think it's one of his best performances. It's mannered. Steiger's performances are always a bit mannered. And it's a bit cerebral and sort of inner person for Leone. But the problem was, on the set, that you've got two diametrically opposed philosophies of acting. You've got this graduate of the actor's studio who wanted the spontaneity and liked things to be captured in take one. And you've got this director who famously did between 18 and 25 takes routinely in order to get exactly the effect he wanted, who wasn't very verbal, who tended to post-synchronize, who wasn't interested in psychology very much. And so, the sparks were bound to fly. And they did. They rowed a lot on set. Culminating in Steiger walking off at one point, just the scene where they were just about to blow up the stagecoach. He got in his car, went back to his hotel in Almeria. Leone didn't speak to him for a day or two and only communicated through an assistant director. Rather scurrilously, one of the people who worked on it remembered one of the messages that went through the assistant director was, "Will you please tell Mr. Steiger not to wiggle his ears so much?" Eventually, they seemed to make peace with each other, to the extent that after the movie was finished, Steiger gave a seminar in New York, which Martin Scorsese remembers attending, where he sang Leone's praises as a great director of actors, not for the subtlety of the words, but for the presence that he gave actors. These close-ups, the music, the great entrances, did huge favors to actors. Like an opera director, he gives you a great entrance and he gives you, everything you want to create your charisma. So they settled their differences. All the American actors remember a lot of hand-waving, a lot of shouting, a lot of, "I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this," but they got there. And that was the sort of creative combustion that they worked in. But Steiger never liked the title, Duck Husaca. Nobody did, actually, amongst the Americans. For some reason, Leone was convinced this was a well-known phrase in American vernacular. Everyone went around saying Duck Husaca. I don't know where he got that from. It is an Italian phrase, giù la testa col leone, which means literally, put your head down, balls. Which is a very odd phrase, put your head down, balls. But they took the Corleone off the end, Coglione, and kept giù la testa, keep your head down. And that's a good title, because it summarizes the philosophy of the film. Keep your head down, don't get involved, don't put your head above the parapet, you'll get it shot off, is basically the theme of the movie. But that turned into American to Duck Husaca. And it made it look like, I don't know, a Marx Brothers film, or a Donald Duck film, or I don't know what the hell it looked like. So they had to retitle it A Fistful of Dynamite, a rather exploitative title, to make it sound like Fistful of Dollars, which it isn't. The French title, which was the original title of the screenplay, is by far the best. Once Upon a Time, The Revolution. Once upon a time, here are all these fairy tales. Bet you thought this. Bet you thought the Mexican Revolution was like this. The Revolution. This is what it's like. An act of violence. Once upon a time, The Revolution. And in France, where it had that title, it did very well. When Leone started developing a project, he became a complete perfectionist. He'd spend hours and hours and hours with his scriptwriters, Luciano Vincenzoni or Sergio Donati, hours and hours and hours with Morricone, the composer, talking it through, acting out all the characters, turning it into a kind of fairy tale as told to someone by a fireside. That was his approach of evolving stories. And then he'd have the script he liked, which was lots and lots of stage directions, not much dialogue, lots and lots of stage direction. By the time he got shooting, he had an absolutely clear idea of what he wanted. It was the opposite of improvisation. He didn't storyboard at all. He never storyboarded, but he had a very, very clear idea. Everyone who worked with him remembers the really, really, you put the camera there on that spot. Now, as the movies got more complicated and bigger, it was quite a thing actually to do that with something like Dakyusaka, which the logistics are absolutely huge. By the time he had the budgets to do so, he used a lot of cameras and he was famous for the number of takes that he took. So his shots were very complicated like that by that stage, that every shot was carefully worked out. There's an awful lot going on in the background very often, big foreground, lots of stuff in the back. So he had a lot of coverage, a lot of takes, a lot of complexity. The sequence in Dakyusaka that logistically I think is absolutely astonishing is where all these Mexican civilians are in these trenches and you've got the soldiers of Huerta shooting them down, like the death pits of Dachau and Mauthausen and Belsen, which was deliberate as a visual reference. The logistics of that must have been fantastically complicated. Dakyusaka was made during the time when Italian cinema, Italian theatre, Italian literature was rethinking its relationship with fascism and with the Nazi occupation of Rome in the 1940s. In Dakyusaka, there are references to the concentration camps in Germany, which the Allied troops opened up in 1945. There are references to a famous massacre of Roman civilians that took place in 1944, where the SS, in reprisal for a bomb attack, massacred 335 civilians and walled them up in a cave at the end of the Via Ardeatine. It's now a memorial in Rome. You can visit it, in the hope that no one would find these bodies, but they did after the war, and it became a huge thing in Italian culture. And there's a direct reference to that in Dakyusaka with the cave of San Isidro, where Juan's family and lots of other civilians are massacred. Everyone would have recognized that. Leone wanted movies to get bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, Clint Eastwood once told me that one of the reasons their careers had diverged was that whereas Eastwood was very happy to make small movies to start with, that Leone, each film had to get pumped up more and more and more. He had a kind of David Lean complex. I want to make the biggest movie that's ever been made. And each of them gets bigger and bigger and bigger. His scriptwriters, Vincenzoni and Donati, said to Leone in 1968, try and make a movie in one room in Rome. Just, about contemporary Italy. Just do a small black and white film. Give it a go. No, we've got to have tanks. Leone is not an ideological sort of character, just as he isn't an intellectual. He's not that interested in party politics. But he has this sense that it's a mess and that he doesn't trust political parties and professional politicians very much. Faced with that, what have you got left? The family, for him, the family and the extended family was absolutely key, as indeed it was for John Ford. But the bottom line is also these very attractive characters who are complete anarchists, who don't give a damn, who eat too much, who swear, who shout, who have these very elaborate curses. They're the life forces of Leone's cinema. Eli Wallach as Tuco, Rod Steiger has Juan Miranda. These are these ballsy characters who represent the heart of the movie. Leone loved characters like that. There's a Falstaffian element in Leone's character which comes through in those anarchists, and Juan Miranda is a classic example of it. Leone had introduced a flashback structure initially in For a Few Dollars More, where we have this traumatic incident in the past which ties Indio, the bad guy, together with Colonel Mortimer. In Dakyusaka, this is taken to even more extreme lengths, where the flashbacks get longer, they're set in a different country, they're all about Sean's nostalgia for a time when revolution seemed very clear. He knew what he was doing. He's fighting the Brits in Ireland. It's the beautiful green countryside, like John Ford's film The Quiet Man. Ireland is impossibly green and beautiful. And it was one of the sadnesses of the release of Dakyusaka that the final flashback, which makes sense of Sean and makes sense of the relationship between Juan and Sean, was taken out because they were worried that it was so long and slow motion-y and such a downer that the audiences would leave before the end and they'd miss the point of the movie. So they cut it out, which was a shame because it's a key part of the jigsaw. Schoenberg, the composer, once said about Wagner, if you cut Wagner's Ring Cycle, you don't get a short opera, you get a long opera that's short in places. And it happened in Dakyusaka with the final flashback.